Blessings, salutations, and kalazi to all of you in listening land. I am Stephen Janicek, and you are now in the temple of the Myth Nerd. The Myth Nerd is basically an experimental podcast I'm doing on one of my all-time favorite subjects, something that has completely engrossed my attention since I was a little titan, and that is world mythology. Why is mythology so important to us today? Well, I believe if you can understand a culture's core beliefs, their sacred stories and theology, then you can gain an insight into their basic values, psychology, and the very identity or soul of their society. We stand on the backs of our ancestors, so it is important to know where we came from and what our forebears believe. Now, for today's pilot episode, I'd like to talk about a much misunderstood and sometimes much maligned divinity of classical Greek culture. That is Hecate, or Hecate, or Hecate, or Hecate. Tomato, tomato, you decide which you want to say, because I've never gotten a straight answer on how it's supposed to be pronounced. This goddess permeates much of our fantasy entertainment, from references in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Hellboy to the more antediluvian, if you want to use a fancier word, theatrical productions like Euripides' Medea and Bill Shakespeare's Macbeth. As such, I feel this Lady of Shades and sorcery deserves a special tip of the hat, pointed as that hat may be, as she's often associated with the more spooky things in mythology like witchcraft, ghosts, and necromancy. Since I know everyone has places to be and people to see, which is appropriate because Hecate is a goddess of travel and roads as well, I'm going to try to keep this as short and sweet as possible. We'll briefly touch on some of the more important aspects of Hecate's history, her symbolism, her epithets or praise names, as well as a bit regarding how she was viewed in daily life in Athens. What's interesting about Hecate is that, like Dionysus and his counterpart Apollo, or again, if you want to be a proper Greek, Apollon, she is not in fact a homegrown Greek divinity. She's an import from Asia Minor. She was known to have a major cult site in Lagina, I think I said that right, which is situated in modern-day Turkey, and was also said to have been worshipped in the ancient city of Colchis. Now, Colchis is an important point to remember because Medea, the character found in Euripides' play of the same name, as well as in the myth of Jason and the Argonauts, was a princess of Colchis and a priestess of Hecate, linking the goddess's archaic past with her later Greek and Hellenistic writings proper. One of the earliest references we have to Hecate in Greek culture itself comes to us from the great poet and economist of all things, Hesiod. I guess religion and money do go together after all. Hesiod was said to have lived around the same time as the immortal bard Homer, and in his phenomenal work, The Theogony, he pretty much set the stage for almost everything we know about the classical gods of myth today. In the Theogony, Hesiod writes with great admiration and affection regarding Hecate, leading some scholars to believe that he held a special cultus or particular devotion to her. His classical hymn to the goddess reads thusly. Now, what I personally find so interesting about this hymn is that it establishes Hecate as a titan, an ancient power, and not an Olympian, a new god proper like Zeus and all of his siblings, which may be why she's not referenced as dwelling on Olympus with the other gods in the more well-known myths. This is important to note as Hecate appears to be a goddess of liminality, or between states. She's not dwelling specifically in any one place, yet at the same time, seemingly having access to them all. You'll also note that in this hymn, Hesiod does not mention any of the classical dominions we often associate with Hecate, such as crossroads, roads, necromancy, witchcraft, and ghosts. It's possible that this could be a later addition, but I'm dumb, so I'm not educated enough to say yay or nay on that. You're going to have to do your own research. Now, it's in the city of Athens where Hecate becomes prominent in daily religious life. She's one of the domestic gods, the household gods, along with Zeus, Apollo, Hermes, Hestia, Agathos Daemon, and sometimes Hercules, or, again, Heracles if you want to be Greek about it. Her shrines are mentioned in the literature of the day as being placed either at the threshold of the home or sometimes on the porch. Here I quote Astrophanes. I have heard it foretold that one day the Athenians would dispense justice in their own houses, that each citizen would have himself a little tribunal constructed in his porch, similar to the altars of Hecate, and that there would be such before every door. So in addition to being served daily by the Athenian populace, Hecate seems integral to the harmony of daily living, being viewed as a sort of patron of justice in the home. Not only are Hecatesian or Hectite altars constructed for the purposes of familial stability, but also for defense against witchcraft, phantoms, and the evil eye. Notice the phrasing there, defense against witchcraft, phantoms, and the evil eye. It seems Hecate was worshipped to ward these supernatural forces away from mankind rather than to invoke or bring them into play as a witch or a sorcerer might. Goes, by the way, is the proper Greek term for a sorcerer. Now that doesn't mean she couldn't be called upon to bring up the dead or to work some sort of magic. There is plenty of later literature which suggests that she certainly could and did. Two important points to consider when we're talking about classical Greek beliefs is that one, the god who did a thing could also do its opposite. For example, Apollo was the god of plagues and epidemics, but he was also a god of healing as well. One could say similar for Ares. He is the god of war, but he was also viewed as a god of harmony and the patron of the local militia. You'll see in the hymns of Homer and of Orpheus, Ares is actually called upon to suppress anger, basically, and to restore harmony. The second point to remember is that to the pious Greek, engaging in acts of witchcraft was considered to be miasma, or to be basically impure, religiously speaking. It's essentially a sin if you want to use a modern reference. Though again, even though magic was a taboo at this time, it was still done. In my next segment of The Myth Nerd, I plan to get a little more in depth regarding Hecate's role in Greco-Egyptian magic and religion, as well as her role in Neoplatonic theurgy, or god work, as well as her role as leader of the classical Greek mystery schools. Well, my mysties, or initiates into the mysteries, that's it for part 1 of my pilot episode of Myth Nerd. Please listen in for part 2, where we will get more in depth about the goddess Hecate. If you want some really good outside sources on this great mythological dame, I highly suggest Sarah Illes Johnston's Hecate Soteria, as well as Ron von Rudloff, I hope I said his name right, his good work, Hecate in Ancient Greek Religion. Also, anything by Daniel Ogden would also be a benefit to your studies. He doesn't write about Hecate directly, but almost all of his work references her indirectly, so it will give you a context of kind of how she was viewed by the religious society at the time, especially with regard to oracles and the dead. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am closing the doors to the temple. I'm putting out the fires and I'm dousing the incense. So my advice to you would be to find your myth and live it.